How's everyone? Good. So am I. I noticed we have some new people on this morning for the webinar, and so let me give a bit of an introduction. A few weeks ago, we decided to try an experiment, and that experiment is called Let's Talk. And the purpose behind this is to help create a more intimate atmosphere between our webinar guests, our local people, and myself, so that we can get to know one another. And also, I'm the kind of person that likes feedback. Interestingly enough, not everybody is really into giving feedback unless they're angry, you know, and then there's no problem. But this past week, I've received some lovely emails from folks that have heard my plea and are giving feedback about the Sunday talks, about Let's Talk, and simply trying to get acquainted with one another. So I've learned the names of some new people and the countries that they live in and their spiritual activity, and it's very joyful for me. And it helps me to understand also better the level of, the level of consciousness that our webinar folks are responding to, but or experiencing, but also our YouTube watchers. We have some people that just watch the YouTube video, you know, after the Sunday service is over, then our recording team puts that up on the internet. And so it seems to be one section of people that watch the YouTube, and then we have another section of people that watch the webinar, and then of course locally. So we have a diversified group. So the first few minutes of each Sunday we're going to devote to this segment we're calling Let's Talk. So that is asking some questions, or that's asking responsibility from you. If you have a desire to ask a question about an earlier talk or something that's going on around the world and you'd like to make a comment about it, as long as it's not a political situation, then you're welcome to do so. So I see we don't have any questions yet from our webinar folks. But what happened last week, I had been embroiled in a discussion with a friend and co-worker who said that the soul cannot be educated. I was stupefied, but it was a wonderful discussion, and since then I've done some research and thinking about, you know, that approach, and have also gotten some feedback on the internet or through the web, through email. Anyway, this is what I haven't changed my mind, just to let you know. But I've also expanded my thinking a little bit to recognize it depends on what stream of teaching you are from as to whether or not you believe the soul can be or should be educated. For example, some people believe that the soul is an element of perfection, of divine perfection, and that as the soul comes into incarnation, then the expression of that soul begins to take place, and the perfection is released. I don't have a problem with that. You know, that makes sense to me, because the Ageless Wisdom teaching, aka Agni Yoga specifically, and Torkham's teachings broadly, that the soul is the divine archetype of what we are to become. It is our future. So I've scoured the books this week. It's been a wonderful adventure. And this is what I found in the teaching. The first statement is the soul needs a spiritual education. The soul needs a spiritual education. Now, to get a little more detailed, in the teaching that I adhere to, we have a complexity of souls, the word soul. So we have the lower s, or lowercase soul, and that's our divine spark. It's called the unfolding human soul. And then we have the capital S soul, which also means the solar angel. The capital S soul refers to the solar angel. It also refers to one's higher self. And there is a point where the two merge. And between now and then, between now and the merging process, the higher self, or the solar angel, is in the process of inspiring and teaching our unfolding human soul. And then we have the true self, which I'm going to be talking about a bit this morning. So I want to repeat this statement: the soul needs a spiritual education. And then one other statement: education is a search for your soul. So when we're talking about education, it doesn't mean that we're picking up a book and trying to find our soul. See? It can certainly guide us and help us understand what we're looking for, but life is, or nature is, an avenue or a way to educate us as we are searching for this soul. It's a very beautiful subject and not easy for some of us, depending on whether we take an occult approach or a mystical approach. The occult approach is a little bit more complicated because it requires the use of the mind. The mystical approach is easier because it's just feeling. Okay. And then let me read this to you. Education is a search for your soul. I want to repeat that. Education is the search for your soul. Education has a definite goal: to create individual, national, and global advancement and transformation until the consciousness enters the transpersonal sphere of beingness. I'm going to repeat this. I know it's a lot of words. Education has a definite goal. Again, it can be our academic education, it can be the education from nature, it can be the education of our day-to-day trial and error experiences, but it has a definite goal, which is to create individual, national, and global advancement and transformation until our consciousness enters the transpersonal sphere, the transpersonal sphere of beingness. So this is my challenge, is get interested in your soul. Can your soul be educated or not? I just from my own experience, I know it can. And education for me of the soul, and you can think about this in your own life, is when you began your life as a real entity, you became awake, you were aware, and you recognized that you had some potential that you wanted to develop, and opportunities began coming to you to develop your talents, to unfold some of these potentials that you had, the more education that you were given to help develop and unfold your talents, the more you sensed some presence inside of you, something unique, something extraordinary, until you reached a point you recognized that something inside of you was divine. It was not a gross physical body or had nothing materially that you could relate to. It was more abstract. That's the soul. So I'm not going to elaborate on this because there's no other questions here unless you have some from locally. So the point is, get out your books, read about the soul, read about the soul needs a spiritual education, and you're going to hear me use that phrase 2 or 3 times this morning about needing a spiritual education, and this is why. We have so many distractions. Like when I was growing up, I was an expensive kid to have around in the family because my parents wanted me to develop this musical talent that I seemed to have. So that required paying for music lessons for the kid, right? And then it required buying a violin. Then it required playing and buying a piano so I could play a piano. And then, you know, the whole process took place. These things don't just happen. And I guess that's my point, is that my mom and dad could have said, look, I don't have time to help you with this. We're busy earning money and spending it on other things. So it was their challenge. How do I say this? I'm trying to tie it into this morning's talk, is to stay concentrated on why they adopted me, why they brought me into the family. And they learned that I had a musical talent. So they stayed concentrated on realizing that this is a child, a little girl that has a potential, and they had a responsibility to help bring out this potential. See, that's spiritual direction. Where dad was busy making a name for himself in the business world, mom was being a mom, back in the day of what a mom was, you know, in the kitchen and learning how to iron and cook and be a good mom and so forth. They didn't let the outer life distract them from the spiritual education of myself or my brother. Fast forward to today, we have a lot of distractions, And these distractions prevent us from having a spiritual education. So it is easy to find an education in today's society if we are about material needs and material goods and saving money and getting the best house and the best car and having the best clothes and so on and so forth. All of those are distractions that prevent us from engaging in a spiritual education. So we're here to educate ourselves and anyone who's interested through spiritual education, and the soul is gaining from this. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Did you have a question?
I had a comment, and see if this is in alignment. That to me, the idea of the awakening of the soul and the metaphor of like a seed, you know, a divine seed. I mean, this is in the books, and that when it fully develops into like the oak tree, that is, the fully developed soul, whereas the seed is the potential. So
Right.
it's divine, but it's not fully awakened.
Right. So something has to nurture that seed so it will germinate and flower into its purpose. Right. Spiritual education. Any other questions? So this morning, the title of this talk this morning is, As Your Light Increases, Your Ego Diminishes. As your light increases, your ego diminishes. Last week I talked about the self, our true self. And I said that our true self is that divinity that is that creative center within us, within you, within me, within everyone. And that this self, this creative center, is the source of our light and love and power. This morning I'm going to talk about the actualization, how we can bring more and more of this true self, more and more of our light and love and power into manifestation. And then the rest of the talk, and interspersed throughout the talk, I'll be sharing about our understanding of the ego and why we want our ego to diminish. We don't want it to. This is very interesting, and this is something that I learned early on as a student, that you don't want to throw your ego into the ocean until you have a strong sense of who you are. So for a while, it's okay to have an ego, not to be egotistical, but to have an ego because that is your identity. But as we begin to manifest our true self, the source of our creativity, the source of our inner light, then we no longer need the false self as an identity. So let me give you a definition of the human ego. It is a term that we use to mean an entity that is a combination of reality and shadow. That's what the ego is. It is an entity that is a combination of reality and shadow. So for many years, many lifetimes, we are simply a shadow of reality until we find a way to bring our divinity, that creative center within us, into a manifestation. The more we observe ourselves, the more we detach our real self from our lower nature, our ego. The more we observe ourselves, the more we detach our real self from our lower nature, from our ego, the shadow. Okay? So the real self is the observer. The moment we identify ourselves with our different activities, when we become totally absorbed in our day-to-day activity, absorbed in our emotions and thoughts, and we lose ourselves in them, that's when our level goes down accordingly. Okay, that's the first, that's sort of like the introduction, to what we are and what we are not, who we are and who we are not. Now I want to get more into how we can bring and actualize our true self in a pretty easy way. And I'm going to give you 5 points. And normally I would take these 5 points and put them in the middle of the talk, but I wanted to get these 5 points expressed in the very beginning. It's going to make more sense to you to recognize that this is the exercise for you to begin to manifest and practice and to manifest these 5 points. And this is the deal. The teaching says that it's best to start from the mental level down rather than going with the physical and up. The teachings say let's start with the mental level. So the first stage or the first exercise of this practice is to develop observation. Develop observation. This is really, really important. It means to be alert and awake every moment with all of our senses and observe. This is not easy. We need to observe others, but we also need to observe ourselves. So it's a twofold process. Now, what are we going to observe? When we're observing another person, you might want to observe their facial features, what they are wearing, and things like that. What's so interesting as you begin to undergo this exercise and you begin to practice the process of observation, you're going to observe how much light you will draw from the spirit into your mental body. I can't explain it any better than that. It removes yourself from your critical mind. Instead of saying, wow, that shirt is wrinkled, or wow, those colors don't match at all, or why is that person's face so wrinkly, or why does that woman walk like a man, or why does that man walk like a woman? That's where it begins. But then you're connecting with something higher than your critical mind, that true self. And that light comes in and you begin to understand why the wrinkle face, why the woman walks like a man, why the man walks like a woman, and so forth. And the same is with yourself. You can ask yourself in your observation, why am I thinking this way? How am I thinking about certain things? Observe how you talk and what you are saying and why you are saying it. This is all part of the first of the 5 steps, observation. So we can start this today, the practice of observation. The next is to develop attention, developing attention. This too is pretty mental. Now think about this. Most people can exercise attention for not more than 3 minutes. Yesterday when I was walking my 4 dogs, I hate to compare a human being to a dog, but I learn a lot from my 4 dogs. Okay, so they all run out the front door, right? They're so excited. They don't know why they're excited. They just run out the front door. Okay, well then they realize they're out there for a reason. I keep trying to tell them that. And okay, so they get busy doing their reason for being out. And then one of the dogs barks. And the other 3 dogs turn around. This is like nanoseconds from running out that front door. What is he barking at? Look, that tree's moving. Look, here's somebody coming down the street. Oh my gosh, juniper berries are falling on my head. Which is true. Their attention span is seconds long. The teaching tells us that the attention of a human being is not more than 3 minutes. Pitiful. Why is that? Why can't we hold our attention for any longer than 3 minutes? It's because the influence is coming from our subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind, the personality, the ego, are outside influences that affect our mind, that blur our mind. It's like driving over here this morning, listen to TED Talks. They're talking, this fellow from one of the New England universities was talking about making decisions. And he said, most of us do not make our own decisions. They're made for us because of outside forces. Now, he talked 15 minutes about this, and I'm not going to do that. You can go to TED Talks and hear why. It was quite interesting. I can say this much. The 2 points that he made is that our decisions are based on outside influences, and the other reason behind our decision making was the environment that we're in. Now, we could tell him something else. The subconscious mind, their personality, the ego, influences, in this case, our attention span. So you're listening to a talk, something comes forward from your subconscious mind, and you don't hear another word that the speaker is saying. You're really involved now, in your own private thoughts. So you're going to try to be attentive to this morning's talk. You are good for 3 minutes, and then something happens and you lose your attention. Then what happens? Maybe 5 or 10 or 15 minutes later, you return to listening to the talk, and you're not even aware that this has happened. It happened so quickly. You're not even aware of it. So later, when you try to share the content of the talk with another person, you can't, because you've lost 10, 15, or 20 minutes of the subject matter, and so then you begin to make up. You fill in the blanks. When you have attention and observation together, you have control. Observation and attention, you have control, which means you're no longer influenced or distracted by your triggers. The third point is concentration. Develop concentration. Some folks think that observation, concentration, and attention are the same thing, but they're not. Concentration is very interesting. It is the steady pouring energy into one direction. The steadily pouring of energy into one direction. That's concentration. So, for example, you start a project. If you have concentration, you're going to finish the project. If you have concentration, you're going to finish the project. If not, you're going to quit after a short while. Concentration is the state in which we accumulate enough energy to actualize our goals. So we have observation, attention, and concentration, those 3 points. And interestingly enough, these 3 points are 3 major steps to begin to actualize our true self, not the shadow self any longer, the true self. So, for the rest of this morning's talk, see if you can observe yourself, create condition or attention, and stay concentrated. You can start learning concentration by reading 1 page of a book and then understanding its contents. Or you could say, okay, I love this person. And I'm going to love this somebody no matter what. If you continue to love that person no matter what happens, that's concentration. See how we're expanding an understanding of concentration? That's concentration. What does that mean? It means now you've got the support, the wisdom, the light, the love, the power of your true self as you make that commitment to love somebody no matter what. If you change like a butterfly, you have no concentration. You do not have direction, and you do not have enough energy to keep that direction because you have no concentration. So that's the third. The fourth is meditation. We want to develop meditation. Meditation is the ability to strengthen our outflowing energy to such a degree that we cut outside influences. As we meditate, we expand our consciousness further and further, increasing our light and diminishing our lower self, the ego, the false self. This is what meditation does. So we have observation, we have attention, we have concentration, and now we have meditation. All 4 points, and exercising these points begins to diminish the lower self, the false self, the shadow. When we build that shield around us, nothing can influence us from our personality vehicles, or from outer influences, or from the subconscious mind. Then our decisions are the result of our light and love and power, that creative center within us. This is our spiritual education. Education that will coordinate our personality with our human soul. If we can learn these things ourselves and then teach or exemplify it to others, we're going to be very surprised at the changes that we're going to see. First, there will be less depression. Second, there will be less suicides, less insanity, less craziness. So spiritual education is a way to engage ourselves with the evolution of our soul, of our family, of our group, of our nation, of humanity. It is becoming engaged with helping humanity to move forward. It's not like in the Piscean era, where as yogis we would go to Himalayan mountains into a cave and stay there for the rest of our lives. Now we're engaged. See, that's the Aquarian age. We are engaged with helping ourselves and humanity evolve and to progress and to move forward. Why? So there's less depression, less suicides, less insanity, less craziness. And what that means to me is that because you're engaged with these 4 points, that now you have a purpose, you have a sense of direction, that you want to help people who are depressed. You want to help those teenagers that are taking their lives and prevent it from happening. You want less insanity to take place, which means that you're going to teach people how to think in a balanced way. See how that all works? So we're not engaging ourselves with these exercises for personal growth, but for the progress of humanity. So the fifth is finally to develop contemplation. Contemplation is that state of consciousness where we open our nature to the rays of the self, to the sun of our capital S, our true self, to the light of our self. Contemplation is a total expansion of awareness of the reality that exists, listen to this, that exists beyond our mind. Now, this is so vital to know. And at the end of this morning's talk, I'm going to share something that I doubt any of you know. I'm going to release a stick of dynamite. And you're going to come back to this point that contemplation is total expansion of awareness of the reality that exists beyond the mind. Last week I talked about some experiences I had, which I later learned as a kid growing up, that these experiences were called nirvana or bliss. Well, here's another word, samadhi. Contemplation is samadhi, or samadhi is contemplation. For example, there's a story about Buddha where he sat on his lotus seat and entered into samadhi. When a ray came out from between his eyes and illuminated the whole space. This is the process of the self, the true self, descending or actualizing. And this is where we become totally absorbed in the self. So these are the 5 practical exercises: observation, attention, concentration, meditation, contemplation, where we can experience ourselves and teach others that will bring balance into everyone's life, the life of others, and to bring balance into our own environment that's going to increase our happiness, joy, and bliss. As our self radiates more, the ego becomes smaller and smaller, and our individuality or true self now replaces the ego. But you must have an identity. We must have an identity. If we do not have a certain amount of identity, see, that's when the outside forces make the decisions for us about our life. When our environment makes our decisions for us. If we don't have a certain amount of identity, we're nothing but like a jellyfish. As our capital S self radiates more, what happens is that our ego becomes totally absorbed in our individuality. It's like Plato was an individual. Buddha was an individual. Christ was an individual, not a shadow. So there are 2 factors within our nature that control us until they are exhausted and left behind. One is the subconscious mind, which is a storage locker of all our past failures, pains, sufferings, good and bad experiences. That's our subconscious. But the subconscious is primarily a collection of painful memories, past sufferings, post-hypnotic suggestions, and blind urges and drives. And the other is our ego. These are the triggers. The subconscious mind are the triggers that control our ego, which for the moment makes up our personality, our life. These two factors mess up our wiring system, and they short circuit our wiring system. Our wiring system is made up of our physical, emotional, and mental bodies. This is our wiring system. As our self-actualization increases, its light penetrates into our subconscious and slowly cleanses it. How does our self-actualization increase? Simply practicing these 5 exercises. A moment then will come into our life when we no longer have the subconscious. So the whole storage locker of pain, suffering, post-hypnotic suggestions, complexes, urges and drives, nightmares, and fearful experiences are slowly going to come to the surface, bubble out, and disappear. And you will control the subconscious. So it is fact that there is a part of us, the divine part, that is untouched by the transiency of life, untouched by the unreal. This means that we were not born just to experience pain and suffering, complexes, fearful episodes of life, and more. We are born, incarnated into the mess we left during our last several incarnations until we experience divine discontent and begin to climb up out of these messes. And it is then we learn through our spiritual education that there is a part of our nature that is untouched by pain and suffering, untouched by opinions and rejection and belittlement and judgment and other difficulties, untouched by karma, good or bad, and triggers. It is our true self. As our consciousness expands and increases in light, that expansion eventually leads us to what is called the all-self. So if there is a part of us that is untouched by pain and suffering, rejection, and other difficulties which enslave the progress of our unfolding soul, difficulties like the ego that hold us back, let us search for it, beginning with the 5 exercises. Okay, for example, you're an alcoholic and you've stopped drinking, but then you see a bottle of wine or vodka or whiskey, and the subconscious says, in the past, you were drinking. What about now? And then you take a drink. And then you suddenly go back into the wrong direction because you've triggered the urges of the subconscious. See how that works? The urges and drives, and most importantly, to understand post-hypnotic suggestions that are controlling us. Now, as our self-actualization increases over our physical, emotional, mental bodies, our subconscious mind slowly drains and cleans itself. And when this happens, we no longer have a subconscious mind. This is control over our subconscious mind, over our false self, the ego. Most of our life is controlled by the subconscious, and we are not aware of it because it's mild. Unlike the teacher that comes with the mallet, bam, ow. It's subtle. For example, let's say that you had a nice experience while being with a man who is just quite lovely and wearing a shirt that happened to be your favorite color. Now, let's fast forward in time and you find yourself with a husband, you're married, you're walking down the street, and you see this fella coming towards you that's wearing the same color of shirt that the guy in the past did. Subconsciously, you begin to imagine or dream, I'm going to leave my husband and go with that man. And you begin to flirt and flirt and flirt until that man can no longer resist you and begins to fantasize about you. Oftentimes, these events have tragic results, and you leave your husband. Or you have similar experiences in your dreams of a sexual nature. The subconscious mind is controlling us. The smell, the colors, the eyes, the manner of dress, and so on of another person are controlling us. But it's not going to happen if you begin to practice observation, attention, concentration, meditation, and contemplation. There are so many influences in the subconscious, but how can we bypass them? There are many psychological methods, psychiatric help, and so forth. But the best way to help yourself is by self-actualization. The human ego is a term we use to mean an entity which is the combination of reality and shadow. That's the human ego. The human ego, now here's some words. The human ego, according to the teaching, is the human soul, the awareness unit, plus the vehicle with which the soul identifies himself. Wherever the identification is located, now you have a command post through which the ego rules the rest of the mechanisms of his constitution. Once the human soul turns into an ego, it loses. See, this is why spiritual education is so important. Once the human soul turns into an ego, it loses the power of his independent observation, evaluation, and actions, and becomes subject to his urges and drives of the body and the transmissions they carry. Not only in regard to genetic inheritance, but also to the fluctuations imposed by the mental, emotional, and physical environment. When the ego identifies his emotional nature, his emotions become very violent and powerful. When the ego identifies with his emotional nature, his emotions become very violent and powerful. When he identifies with this mental body, he turns into knowledge, data, and information. He becomes a walking encyclopedia. So the ego is a dangerous or a contagious disease that spreads from a person to his family, and the family ego comes into being, which is 10 times more dangerous than an individual ego. From a family, it spreads to a group or a nation, and creates national superiority, which is 1,000,000 times more dangerous than the individual ego. So the ego is something that we are not, and as such, we are identified with a false image. How can we protect ourselves? First, practice the 5 exercises. Always stay in your true self. Don't tolerate any reactions or responses that are not under your control. This is not easy, it is heavy, but self-actualization is going to make you a master. You can protect yourself by always standing in your center. You are the self more radiant than the sun. We bring with us into incarnation, and now I'm moving into the closing part of this morning's talk. We bring with us into incarnation the memories of past lives, or we tune in with the remains of the bodies, the corpses we left on the astral and mental plane. This is a stick of dynamite. I bet you didn't know this. We tune into them, and like a radio, they broadcast our past life into our brain. So you die in the physical plane, and you enter into the astral body. Then you die in the astral plane, and you leave your astral body, and you enter into a mental body. Eventually you die and you leave your mental body. To die means to leave your body on that plane where you died. Physically, astral plane, mental plane. Then you take another physical incarnation. But the astral and mental bodies have not died yet. It is even possible that your former physical body has not yet died if you put it in a tomb, if you mummified it and put it in a mausoleum. So let us say that your body stays for 200 years in a mausoleum. When you take incarnation, because your physical body in that mausoleum is still intact, you will have the same pains that you had 200 years ago, because the frequencies and the waves are telepathically coming and saying, this is it, this is it. So this is why the great sages tell us to cremate the physical body. When your previous emotional body is not dead, all of your past emotions control you. You create many fabrications because your former astral body is controlling you. When your former mental body controls you, you show the signs of that mental body, such as fanaticism and I can't say this word, I practice it. Conservatism. There we go, conservatism. Where you are in opposition to change. Conservatism is when you are in opposition to change or innovation. You cannot expand your mind. You become a bigot. You believe the same things that you were believing 5,000 years ago. Humanity is not living in a new century. Many people are living in the 8th and 9th centuries. The teaching explains that for the most part, humanity's consciousness is actually in the 6th century, S-I-X, 6th century. We cannot allow this revenge and separatism and hatred and ignorance to continue on. It is almost impossible to clean, though, because their bodies are still alive. People are being controlled telepathically through remote control by their bodies. Why do these bodies not die or disintegrate? There is a law in the universe which says the coarser your bodies, the longer they live in subtle levels. When you are an advancing disciple or you become an advanced initiate, your mental body evaporates immediately after you leave the mental plane or the mental body. Because you are now an initiate, you are not controlled by the past. So I'm going to leave us there because I've really run over this morning, but I just feel like this is important. This is spiritual education. Yes. Okay.